Ken Hickman from the Penn State All Sports Museum. Ken, always a pleasure. Great to have you back.
Yeah, same here. So, it's certainly always a good time talking with you.
Yeah, at least we're doing it when the Phillies are playing so well. I mean, a month ago I wouldn't have wanted to talk to you.
Well, you have to talk yourself back, from the window ledge, every now and then. But
God, they're playing great. They've won. Yeah, they won 4 out. Well, now Washington 4 out of 5. But I mean, it's like
look,
it's like like taking you took 4 out of 5 from the Pirates. Like, okay, that's nice.
Look, it's you have to beat the bad teams as well as the good, and that's not something they've always had the habit of doing. The front part of the season reminded me of the old days, say in the late '90s, where they'd go sweep the juggernaut Braves, then come home and lose to some team that was 20 games under 500. So
yeah. The irony of talking about the latest exhibit is that last night out of nowhere, I popped in the movie Battle of the Bulge.
That's going back. That's what Henry Fonda.
Henry Fonda, Danny Andrews, Robert Ryan, Robert Shaw, right? And watch that. Well, this, which then leads us to your World War II exhibit. You had to put a lot of research in on World War I just because of the century of it. Was it a little bit easier to do World War II versus World War I because better documentation, time frame not as great as 100?
What was interesting was it actually worked out to be the opposite.
Okay.
We had some work the Alumni Association had done, back around 1920, gave us kind of a head start on that World War I project.
Yeah.
For this, we really didn't have that kind of launch pad to go from. We had to go back, and run all of our letter winner lists against pension records, to try to track down the 1,200 plus men and women that we identified.
True. Were there, I'm going to assume there were more Penn Staters in World War II than one, right?
Oh, by a wide margin.
Yeah.
And you're talking about watching Battle of the Bulge last night. We had a whole bit contingent who took part in that. We had a former wrestler, Claire Hess, who was 101st Airborne. He was there at Bastogne through that whole siege in the snow. And we actually had former student athletes who were with Patton's Army that came in and relieved that siege too.
Yeah, Third Army, which swept up from the south of France.
Right.
That made such a big difference. What about those who participated in D-Day? I mean, that is. I mean, I think the U.S. I think lost 4,000 on that day, something like that.
Again, we had what we found with this project is we had former student athletes in every corner of the world, every theater, every branch of the armed services, every major engagement.
Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Guadalcanal, you name it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We had one fellow who came to Penn State through a Marine program during the war, but was in the Marines beforehand. He was at Pearl Harbor. He was in the garrison on Midway. Landed on Guadalcanal. Then came to Penn State. To go through a officers training program. We had two former student athletes, who were in the Philippines when the Philippines fell. They both survived the Bataan Death March. One of the two survived the war. The other was, actually drowned when his POW transport was sunk by American aircraft. They really were everywhere. And then that includes D-Day. A couple coming ashore, on Utah Beach, with the 4th Infantry. One on Omaha, and a whole slew of guys in the airborne as well.
Yeah. My mother had two cousins that were captured in the war. One was captured by the Nazis, and one was in the Bataan Death March.
Oof.
Obviously, they both survived. The one that was captured by the Nazis would reluctantly, but would talk about the experience. It was not good, but it wasn't good, but he would talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
The one in the Bataan Death March would never talk about it. He never would. He wouldn't even utter the words.
We're very, very fortunate that the fellow who died right before the end of the war, who survived Bataan, was able to keep a typewritten journal, at the prisoner camp in Cabanatuan. And when he was shipped out, he knew the Japanese would take it from him, so he wrote a cover sheet that said, "This is my diary. This is my mother's address. If anybody finds this, please send it back to her in Carmichael's, Pennsylvania." And somebody did. So you have this great first-person story of all of his time in the camp. And whether it was dealing with the guards or whatever diseases might be going around, you have the opportunity to read his words. And they were somewhat aware that the prisoner transports, because the Japanese didn't mark these ships as carrying POWs.
Right.
They were somewhat aware that they were being sunk by American ships and aircraft, and he actually wrote in the last entry of his diary, "I hope we are not sunk by our own ships."
Right. What about in Penn State football during World War II kept playing?
Yep.
And 42, 43, 44, because the 41 season ended before Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and in 45, VJ Day was, they signed on September 2nd, I think it was. So 42, 43, 44, Penn State ended up winning 17 games during that span, was never under 500. In your examination, what kind of shell of a program was Penn State? What kind of shell of a program happened to be the opponents they were playing because of the war?
Yeah, you know what? It's that sport I think was somewhat fortunate. We tried to maintain a full athletic program, and we did up through 1943, and we had to put a number of sports on hiatus in 44. But what really allowed things like football, baseball, basketball, to continue was the fact that the Navy Marine Corps guys who were here on an accelerated degree program, because with the Navy, if you're going to get commissioned, you have to have a college degree. And the Navy had established this V-12 program at a number of schools, and those guys were allowed to participate in varsity athletics. And that's really what kept the engine running during the war years, was that we could tap into this pool of men who were here for, it could be a couple months, it could be a year and a half. Our last 5-sport letter winner, Tubby Crawford, was a Marine Corps V-12, and football was one of his sports, along with, I think, hockey, soccer. I can count on my hand here: football, hockey, soccer, I think lacrosse, and boxing. In 9 months, in his case. But being able to have those guys come in, some of whom had prior playing experience at other schools, really let us keep playing. And schedules were contracted a little bit. You probably weren't going to travel, as far and wide as you might, just due to travel limitations. But they were able to keep it going.
All right.
And as you said, have some success while doing it.
Yeah. Now, post-war, Notre Dame, for example, was under Frank Leahy, was incredibly dominant and deep, because post-war, a lot of student athletes came back and were allowed to resume their play. And they were able to, some people said some of the better scrimmages were the ones between the first and second teams. But Penn State,
I can believe that.
But Penn State went 21-3-2 in 46, 47, 48, including the Cotton Bowl, which, by the way, coincides with the last 3 seasons Bob Higgins was the head coach.
Yep.
Did Penn State benefit from those coming back from the war?
Oh, I would say absolutely. It was a mix of former players coming back, as well as guys who, for whom college might not have been in the cards if it wasn't for the GI Bill. Coming back from overseas, and these are, to quote, or paraphrase, I guess, Lou Prado, like these were not boys, these were men.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly.
They were old. They were older. They were more mature. They had seen the world, for good and for bad, and they had been, physically trained for 2, 3, 4 years by the military, and they were definitely ready to go. And you just laid out the records, and those numbers attest to it.
So, what are the highlights of this new exhibit?
Well, I think we've unearthed a whole host of Hollywood level stories, and that's not to downplay all the guys who had much more typical experiences, because they were all contributing in meaningful ways wherever they were. But some of the bigger stories, we have a fellow who Frank Leeson, who was in the OSS, so the forerunner of the CIA. He was running around China with a detachment, blowing up more or less everything they could find. Later had a fictionalized account of his exploits, was made into a movie with Jimmy Stewart playing him. I mean, it's hard to get better than having Jimmy Stewart play you.
Yes. Indiana, Pennsylvania's own.
Yeah, that's right. We have one story. One of our Women's Recreation Association athletes, Emma Jane Foster, grew up right here in State College. Her dad's medical office was down by where Alpha Fire Company is today. She was one of the 2 female nurses who went to China with the Flying Tigers. Her and her late husband were married by Claire Chennault in China. Her husband, unfortunately, was killed before they came home. But her story is just fascinating, and it's not just a Penn State story; it's a State College story. Yeah, this is literally the girl growing up down on the corner, who went out and saw the world. We have a bomber pilot who was shot down over Austria. Ended up we always talk about, like, you run into Penn Staters in the strangest places, but in this case, he ends up in a POW camp in Germany, and one of his pledge brothers, from Beta Sigma Rho, is in the next hut, next door. The first American officer they see when they're liberated is a guy who pledged Beta Sig a year after them. Okay. So, in the midst of the greatest conflict in human history, you have 3 Penn State fraternity brothers running into each other, in Bavaria.
Unbelievable.
I mean, what are the odds of that? It's remarkable. And we have a whole list of stories like that. That we're certainly looking forward to sharing with everyone over the next 3 years.
And what are a couple of other items that excite you about not just this exhibit, but other exhibits you have in there right now?
Sure. This one in particular is the largest special exhibition that we've done to date.
Yes.
And it's really providing already an opportunity to partner with groups across campus. Here in town, we've already been doing some things with the Military Museum, out in Boalsburg. Our programming staff is gearing up now for related things around Arts Fest, and around football season in the fall. While we're moving through all this, we're also doing research. We'll have a new exhibit next year on the Women's Recreation Association, which was the forerunner to women's varsity sports. We're hitting a big anniversary moment here between the 50th anniversary of Title IX, 60th anniversary of women's sports at Penn State. So it's I think it's a great time to bring the stories of that organization forward, and it's kind of let people know that women's varsity sports didn't just materialize out of nothing.
Right.
In 1964, that we really had a deep tradition in place that when the time came and the support was there to take things varsity, that we could just turn things up a notch and not have to build it from whole cloth.
Ken, always a pleasure. And the All Sports Museum, of course, on campus, tours as well. Opportunity for that coming up?
Yep. We'll have stadium tours going on all through Arts Fest weekend. Tickets for those can be had through the Penn State ticket office. And we're looking forward to welcoming folks all summer and into the fall.
It's great to have everybody back. Ken, thank you so much.
Absolutely is.
Yeah, isn't it?
I appreciate it, Steve.
Ken, great talking to you as always, my friend. Let's get together soon.
Sounds good.